Misfits, Midtown, Misfits, Midtown, Misfits, Midtown, Misfits, Midtown, Misfits, Midtown, Misfits, Midtown, Misfits. Hey.
Hi.
Hello. Welcome back, Misfits, and welcome back to a new episode. Today, we are continuing our new series where we are revisiting one of our old episodes. It's episode 13. Yes, it sounds so far off.
I know. We're like 140, whatever, this one, which 13 sounds so small.
It does. I remember, but when we had 13 episodes, we thought it was a lot.
Yeah. When we got on those double digits, we were like, oh, did you see that? Did you see that? And we're like so excited. Which I think it's so exciting when I see the number we have because I can't believe it.
Yeah, it's a ton. It's a ton of episodes. I get surprised when I tell someone.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you have a podcast? Oh, I do have a podcast. Me and my friend do it. We almost have today is like 147 episode came on today. And I was like, dang. And everyone's like, wow. Like I'm like, I know. We've been doing it for almost 3 years.
I know. Like, just take a step back and it's like, that's a lot of episodes.
It is. It's a lot of time.
It's a lot of time, a lot of investment, a lot of laughs. But we're revisiting a very old one. 13.
And in that episode, if you did hear it, if you haven't heard it, if this is your first episode of the Revisited series, then you would not know that we talked about a bunch of women in episode 13. To the point where when I re-listened to that episode recently to prepare for this series, I was like, why did we give so much information in such a short amount of time? Like, it was just so much information. I'm like, man, if anyone heard this, I am so sorry.
Which is one of the reasons why we wanted to revisit. It's like, let's slow it down a little bit. Let's talk a little bit more about these women, give them a little more context, because we definitely try to cram a lot. And I feel like we did that a lot in the first few months that we were doing this, because we're like, we just want to share so much, so like, let's cram all this information in there.
Yeah, and we didn't have a flow yet. So like I said, we talked about a ton of women in that episode, and it's like almost an hour. So we are taking several women of the ones that we spoke about already, and we're doing individual episodes about them just to flesh it out, not only talk about her but also view their story with a new perspective. So this episode today, we're specifically talking about Delilah. That's the woman that we're revisiting today.
Yes. Very interesting woman.
She is. And if you recall, we already talked about her persistence to find out the source of Samson's strength back in episode 29, which is another flashback episode. And that episode is very easy to find because it's very accurately titled Samson and Delilah.
Yeah.
So you can't miss it. You can't miss it.
You can't.
So you can go back to that episode. This is our recommendation always. Just go back to that episode, listen to that. Don't know what we said in there, but I'm sure when you come back here...
I'm sure it was good.
Yeah, I'm sure it was great. When you come back to this episode, it'll have way more context.
Yeah. These just build on each other, so...
Yeah, the OG, episode 29, Fran and Yadi. We're going to get into the episode. And before we get into what the Bible says about Delilah, we're going to find out who Delilah is. We need some more background. We need more information about who this woman is because the Bible gives us very little details. Thankfully, they give us her name, and that's not been a pattern recently.
That is a plus. If you listen to the last two, they did not have names. They did have names. The Bible did not tell us their names.
That's like their running joke.
I feel like every time we say that, we're like, wait. No, they do. Everyone has a name.
No, of course they have a name. We just don't know what it is.
But with this one, the Bible did tell us her name, so it's great.
Yeah, it was a bonus.
Yeah, we love it.
Now, as we all know, every single name in the Bible means something. And it usually gives us a picture of who the person is and what their quote-unquote fate might be. This is why God is in the business of changing people's names. For example, Abram to Abraham and Sarai to Sarah, and of course, many more people. Because people were given names that determined essentially their fate. This is a Hebrew custom and believed in the Middle East and all of these things. And that's why God changes people's names. He's like, no, you are not that. You are this. You are a saint. You're above and not beneath, etc.
You're in a different season of your life. You need a new name.
Exactly. So we're going to go into what Delilah means because we know her name. Like, we have to, okay? So we found out that Delilah is a Hebrew name that means delicate or she who weakened. We also found, and this is where we nerd out, that, quote, her name could be a wordplay on the Hebrew word Layla, meaning night. For as the night overcomes the mighty sun. The name Samson, Shimshon, is related to the Hebrew word Shemesh, which is related to the sun. So essentially, Delilah, quote unquote, overcomes the apparently invisible strongman, Samson.
Which is very interesting. Because if you do know the story, that's like her goal, right? Like to overcome him, or to find out what his strength is to like overcome him. So it's interesting to find that those meanings behind it, and that even in the names, it was already kind of giving us a sneak peek, if you will.
A sneak peek for us nerds who dig.
Exactly. So now you know as well.
Exactly. It's very cool. Also, an important teachy tidbit is that Delilah is the only woman in Samson's story whose name is given, which is so interesting because there are several women in his story, to include his mother.
Yeah, his mom was pivotal, and obviously, like, she gave birth to him and was given, specific instructions and all this stuff, but we never know her name.
We don't. We just know Delilah's name. So it is quite like, why did you do that? So here we go. Some things we do know about Delilah are: she lived in the Valley of Sorek, which was between Israelite and Philistine territory. She and Samson are apparently lovers, but are not married, and she is thought to be a Philistine woman, but the Bible doesn't tell us that explicitly. The reason we think she is because, number one, Samson visited a Philistine town to meet a woman previously, and number two, Philistine men approached her to betray him, and it is thought that, of course, a Hebrew woman wouldn't partner up with Philistine rulers in that way to betray one of their own. Those are some of the things that we know about the Delilah. And with that out of the way, let's reread her story and see what kind of revelation nuggets the Holy Spirit drops on us, because this is about to be good.
Yes.
So Judges, we're going to read Judges 16, verses 4 through 20. And as always, it's going to be in the NLT. This is the caveat. The other day when I was at church, when pastors read verses and they don't tell you what version they're reading from, it's really upsetting. And I feel like every single person that's about to read from the Bible should be like, okay, I'm going to read from 1 John verse 1 through 10. Mm-hmm. And this is in whatever version.
Yeah.
I need you to tell me, because if I question you, or if I'm like, what is that word? Or where did you get that? Like, I need to know you're reading from the Message. Like, let me know.
You know what this just reminded me, though? It's so funny. So back in the day when we had Sunday school in church, there was this one girl she had an NIV version of the Bible. And so most of us had like King James, New King James. So every time she was going to read, she always would say, I have the NIV version. And it would annoy us. But like, I feel like looking back, I'm like, she was actually like being helpful, because if we were reading along, we'd be like, what are you doing? And we were like, and obviously we were like teens. So we're like, oh, she's just trying to be like, oh, I have a different Bible. But now thinking back, I'm like, she was actually kind of being nice and being like, guys, I have a different version, which is helpful. So I'm sorry if I kind of judged you for that, because looking back, I'm like, actually you were being like, hey guys, this is different. So sorry. Side note, but it is helpful. Good thought.
All right, with that out of the way, the Bible says, here we go. Sometime later, Samson fell in love with a woman named Delilah, who lived in the Valley of Sorek. The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, entice Samson to tell you what makes him so strong and how he can be overpowered and tied up securely. Then each of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver, 1,100 pieces of silver, just to clarify. So Delilah said to Samson, please tell me what makes you so strong and what it would take to tie you up securely. Samson replied, if I were tied up with 7 new bowstrings that have not yet been dried, I would become as weak as anyone else. So the Philistine rulers brought Delilah 7 new bowstrings, and she tied Samson up with them. She had hidden some men in one of her inner rooms of her house, and she cried out, Samson, the Philistines have come to capture you. But Samson snapped the bowstrings as a piece of string snaps when it is burned by a fire, so the secret of his strength was not discovered. Afterward, Delilah said to him, you've been making fun of me and telling me lies. Now please, tell me how you can be tied up securely. Samson replied, if I were tied up with brand new ropes that had never been used, I would become as weak as anyone else. So Delilah took new ropes and tied him up with them. The men were hiding in the inner room as before, and again Delilah cried out, "Samson, the Philistines have come to capture you." But again Samson snapped the ropes from his arms as if they were thread. Then Delilah said, "You've been making fun of me and telling me lies. Now, tell me, how can you be tied up securely?" Samson replied, "If you were to weave the 7 braids of my hair into the fabric on your loom and tighten it with the loom shuttle, I would become as weak as anyone else." So while he slept, Delilah wove the 7 braids of his hair into the fabric. Then she tightened it with the loom shuttle. Again she cried out, "Samson, the Philistines have come to capture you." But Samson woke up, pulled back the loom shuttle, and yanked his hair away from the loom and the fabric. Then Delilah pouted, "How can you tell me I love you when you don't share your secrets with me? You've made fun of me 3 times now, and you still haven't told me what makes you so strong." She tormented him with her nagging day after day until he was sick to death of it. Finally, Samson shared his secret with her. "My hair has never been cut," he confessed, "for I was dedicated to God as a Nazirite from birth. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as anyone else." Delilah realized he had finally told her the truth, so she sent for the Philistine rulers. "Come back one more time," she said, "for he has finally told me his secret." So the Philistine rulers returned with the money in their hands. Delilah lulled Samson to sleep with his head in her lap, and then she called in a man to shave off the 7 locks of his hair. In this way, she began to bring him down, and his strength left him. Then she cried out, "Samson, the Philistines have come to capture you." When he woke up, he thought, "I will do as before and shake myself free." But he didn't realize the Lord had left him.
She is a persistent woman.
It took everything from me not to do commentary in between every verse I read.
I know, I kept wanting to say something like, no, just hold it. But I'm like, woman.
That was so difficult. When I felt like I was reading the same paragraph 3 times.
Just slightly different variations.
Oh my goodness. Okay. It was a lot, and we're just going to break it down now. We're going to get real teachy. It's so funny when people say break it down, they're like it's a dance, but we mean it totally differently.
Don't worry, we will not be dancing. This is not a video.
Okay.
We don't have any cardboard.
No, it sounds weird. No, it sounds so weird. I feel like we're going to break dance. So we're going to get into it. That's what I'll say. It sounds less weird. So first, we see that she lives in Sorek Valley, which we've already talked about previously, which was, as we mentioned, it is between Israelite and Philistine territory, which makes us think about not being all in with God because she was in between one territory and the other. Now, the Bible doesn't say this. It's just as we were reading, this is just one of the things that we thought about. And because it's just like, it's an in-between, like she could be swayed one way or another because she wasn't rooted in anything. And it also reminds me similar to like Abraham. Remember Abraham when he set up his tent in Genesis at some point? It said he was between like AI and somewhere else. When I say I mean AI. It's in the Bible. Fact check me. It's in there.
That's literally the name.
Like I to the east and this other place to the west or whatever.
Or like the last one where we talked about Lot, where he's like right outside the city, you know, like he's near it. So
yeah, in between Abraham and like pure sin.
Yeah. And I feel like, you know, the Bible includes these types of details because it really does want to convey like these types of things. Like, you know, like where you're from or where you position yourself matters. I think reading this, like she was in between, that's important for us to know. And it kind of explains a little bit more like why she does certain things, you know? So
yeah. Second, we want to point out that the request to find out where Samson's strength came from, which was actually external. It wasn't Delilah's idea. It was essentially someone else's idea, and she came in agreement with them in exchange for money. So yes, it wasn't her idea, but she was in agreement with it. Like I said, she was like, yes, sure. So off the bat, it just looks terrible. She was offered a bribe to like, quote unquote, turn in her lover. And she said, yes, you know,
she's like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. I want some money.
I'll tell you all his secrets. Okay.
Yeah. Let me figure it out. I'll get right back to you.
Yeah. So right now she still belongs in the Bad Girls Club.
Yeah. So now we're going to get a little extra teachy and go into it a little bit more. But the word used in verse 5 where we just read, entice in the Hebrew means yes, entice, and it also means deceive, persuade, flatter, and allure. So there's a lot of possible definitions. Some of them don't quite fit into this context, but we do see like how she does like deceive him, right? And try to like lure him into giving her the answer to what, she's wanting to know. So with that, we get the picture of what Delilah was supposed to do. Like we understand her goal in like trying to trick him or whatever it is. So now this is not to say that she wasn't already doing these things, because from these verses, Samson and Delilah, of course, were already in a relationship of some sort. They weren't married, but then when these Philistine rulers come along to use her, and then they use this opportunity to like get what they want. And so similar to when the Pharisees and the rest of the gang used Judas, to try to identify and get Jesus. So she was already in the situation, and they just kind of like, oh, she's a good one to use. And they used her because she was already, she already knew Samson and was in the situation. And she was most likely more willing to be bribed, if you will, because of proximity or whatever.
Yeah, like because I think in regards to, because I don't think the Pharisees approached Judas. I think Judas just went to them, if I'm not mistaken. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
But in this case, I feel like we don't know how long Samson and Delilah had been together, but we can just assume that these Philistine leaders had seen her and they're like, oh yeah, we're not going to ask her to turn Samson in, and she's going to turn around and be like, Samson, they said this to me. Like they knew they could use her. There was something about her.
Yeah. I feel like they knew enough about her, and also like the fact that he was probably like not celebrity, but like well known. They had something against him, and so like if they knew something about her that she could benefit from, they weren't like, to me, I keep going back to like she's from somewhere else, like they don't have the same beliefs, and they're not married, so like, hey, let's try to get her that way, like let's use that to our advantage, is what I think like these Philistine soldiers try to use, like what can we use that we do know about her. And this was kind of like angle that they use.
Yeah, and we know that they've been tracking him and stuff, because for the previous chapters before this, he's been killing Philistines left and right. Maybe not in the way that God wanted it to be done, God used it for his glory anyway.
Yeah.
But it was like they've been like stalking him because he keeps killing Philistines and doing like dumb stuff essentially. Like in just like tearing down the like the gates of the city or the gates of the town and doing all this stuff. And it's like, man, they've been like writing in a little journal everything he's been doing.
They're documenting this.
Yeah, like if this was a movie, Delilah would be planted. Like, oh, we'll make her fall in love with her, and then we'll use her. She's a spy.
We'll use her and put her in, and she'll infiltrate. But yeah, definitely, like, he was on their radar. He was, an enemy to them and everything. And so, like, I can see the soldiers being like, we need someone who's close to him that we can still use. And because she wasn't an Israelite and was basically one of them, it's like, oh, we can use that to our advantage, So yeah, so the story continues, and we see this strange game of Delilah asking Samson where his strength comes from. And then Samson rambling off different replies, different scenarios to kind of, like they sound very much like lies to me when we read it. But of course, in the context, I don't know if it seemed like that. But maybe she was just desperate, right? Like she just really needed to know. And so every time he like went to her with like, oh, this, she was like, yes, let me try that. So we don't know if he did it because he was like entertained to do this. Like he thought it was funny or something, or like just playing with her, or he was rattling off something random, or he wanted to see if like she would buy it or not. Like, I don't know. But just, you can tell he's like playing with fire and, in a way kind of trying to see like, is she going to take it? And also her, like, she taking the bait, is that gonna help her or not in the future? Like, is this actually gonna work?
It's weird. It's like they're both it's so dysfunctional.
Yeah.
And they're both like, how far can I push this? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I feel like they're both doing that though. Like maybe you think the things that Samson's saying, but like she's also like, okay, I'll take this bait, and if it's not, I'm going to keep pushing, So it's just weird.
Yeah, it's like an unhealthy, toxic situation because at the same time, where they're going in this like back and forth, and when you read the story, it makes it seem like neither of them can leave. It's like yeah, like you can just break up and leave. Like, just leave. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, if she's this persistent, like maybe that's not to your benefit, Samson. Like if you feel like you need to lie to her about this, like then that's probably not a good relationship. And then on the other hand, if you've seen him lie to you multiple times, like just leave, girl. Like that's not a good relationship either for either of y'all. But they both stick to it.
Yeah, it's very confusing. I mean, not really, because I get that we do that in real life as well.
I think, yes.
But when you're reading it at face value, it's like, what in God's green earth is happening here? And we didn't mention this before, but he's in the book of Judges. He was a chosen judge by God to judge and lead the entire nation of Israel.
Yes.
Like, it was this huge position. It was like the king before the king. Before King Saul, right, is made the first king of Israel. And he's doing this buffoonery.
Exactly. Like he's been set apart. He's been given very specific instructions since like pre-birth, basically. But yeah, we do see this. So finally we see in verse 17, the Bible tells us that finally Samson shares his secret with her and he tells her about, his hair. And so this shows us two things. One, Samson really did think his strength came from his hair. And then two, he didn't attribute his strength to God. Like he might have known he got his strength from God, but for him to just release it so easily, I would think. I feel like he didn't really understand the importance of it, that it came from God. But okay, enough about Samson. Let's go back to Delilah because that's what we're talking about here. So we're going to go over a couple of just thoughts that we have as we were rereading this in this part of the chapter. So one, I think a reason that Delilah fell or accepted this bribe was because it could have meant some sort of security for her, right? Again, like we're talking about, it says that, they were together, they weren't married. And so to Samson, and if she was a Philistine, she also knew that their union wasn't acceptable. Their people did not agree with each other. So she could have just accepted it to be I need to have some money for myself because he's not my husband. He doesn't need to provide for me. So that could have been an incentive for her to do this, right? To say, okay, I'll take the bribe.
It could have. The other thing that I thought about was because her name is in Hebrew, it makes you think, okay, maybe she is an Israelite. But the thought that I had was that she could potentially be of a Philistine Israelite parent combo.
It's possible. Mm-hmm.
She had one parent who was a Hebrew and then gave her the name Delilah, but then the other parent was a Philistine, which is why she lived in this in-between area. And the Philistine rulers felt like they could approach her because it's oh, she's one of us, or if we do this, maybe she'll feel accepted. Who knows? But anyway, that's the thought that I had. Yeah, speculation, misfit speculation, all of it.
Yeah, these are misfit speculations for sure. Two, she could have also accepted the bribe because she was approached by the Philistine rulers and she may have been afraid to turn them down. They are an authority figure, and so if she was also Philistine, then refusing them and also being a woman and refusing them could have potentially not been a good decision for her. So she could have felt cornered in, kind of if I tell them no, something could happen to me, to my family, whatever it is. Even to your point, she might have already felt kind of a bit of an outsider, and then saying no could have made it even worse. There's just so many possibilities with that. So three, she might have also not understood the value of marriage. So again, becoming one. Yes, they weren't married. They could have been acting like they were married, but I don't think she understood what that really meant between if she really thought them as a couple. And even if, let's say they were, she didn't respect him enough to be faithful. And so for her, it was easy to deceive him. So maybe not understanding marriage, or even if they were pretending to be married or living together as a married couple, she found it very easy to be okay with deceiving him. So it makes me think she didn't really understand what true marriage meant, because otherwise you wouldn't do that to your husband, right?
Yes, right.
Everybody say yeah. Okay, no. Another reason is it's also interesting to note that Delilah manipulates Samson several times in order to quote unquote make him tell her. So she essentially says hey, you say you love me, but you won't tell me your secrets. So since they both kept secrets from each other, we can see that there's really not a lot of trust, right, between them, because they're keeping this from each other and they're supposed to be in a relationship. So, a big part of a relationship, especially marriage, of course, but even if you're building up to that, trust is a major thing, and you have to be able to share things like this with each other. So he didn't feel comfortable enough to tell her his secret, obviously, because she didn't know it. And of course, she was keeping the secret of like trying to get this from him for her benefit. And she never obviously told him that. That's why she wanted to know.
Right.
So they were both kind of holding something from each other, which is,
another no.
And then lastly, this is just kind of a bonus, but something that surprised us is that Delilah was never threatened by the Philistine leaders. Like, they didn't tell her like something would happen to her. They seem to have like just been patient enough to be like, okay, well, like, we want this secret, but it doesn't have to be like by midnight tomorrow or something like that.
Yeah.
It was just kind of like, hey, we're gonna like give you time and do what you need to do. So as far as like their initial approach to her, or like every time like he lied and something happened, there's nothing shared in there where like they were pressuring her, telling her like, or threatening her life or something like that. And that seems like something major.
Yeah, and that's so surprising. It is, because as we know, previously there was this other Philistine woman that he was about to marry. And if I'm not mistaken, that one they threatened. And they're like, if you don't do this, it was like, because he gave them the riddle. And he's like, if you don't find, the Philistine men told this potential wife person, he actually kind of did marry her. But anyway, that's another story for a different day. But they actually go up to her and they're like, if you don't tell us the answer to this riddle and basically prevent us from being embarrassed by this Hebrew, we're going to kill you and your family or something like that. And of course, she gets them the answer, and then Samson's pissed, and he does a lot of stuff. He does a lot of destroying. But in this case, it was like, nah, like they hid in the room of her house like several times, and they just seem to be real chill.
Which is, I think, another kind of hint to like her being comfortable with them. So very likely, like, she was a Philistine, and that's why there was this like mutual understanding, or like, hey, I'm okay with you being in my house and like hiding in my house, like that kind of thing. Because it seemed very like, oh yeah, and one of them hid in there, like it's no big deal. And I'm like, no, that's kind of a big deal. We need a little more context, please. But yeah. But she was, again, very comfortable with these men, approaching her, meeting with them. Maybe they were even helping her like devise plans on how, she could like trap him. So yeah, it was a very much like...
It was a plot and a half.
Yeah, it was very much a plot, and they were in the thick of it.
Yes.
Going back, I think similar to Lot's wife, like we mentioned, Samson, because he was set apart and he was like, he had a very specific mission and purpose for his life. Like God was with him. Like, he's an Israelite, and he had an opportunity to share God, but he was very kind of self-centered, really. And instead, this talent and this gift that he had that came from God, he didn't really see it like that. And so he used it for selfish reasons instead. So even though God was still glorified through things that he did, like when we see Samson and his actions, like they're very selfish. And he really was like trying to impress the ladies and like doing all these other things that were not what he was supposed to be doing. So Samson seems like, kind of like a rogue John the Baptist. He had a very similar like makings to live a life that glorified God, and he just kind of got lost along the way. So, it was kind of in a similar way, like John had been set apart, but Samson decided to take it a little bit different.
He went rogue. He did.
So Delilah may not have known any better, but Samson knew better. And so he was raised by God-fearing parents who, by the way, got visited by an angel to tell them he was going to be born and that he had a call in his life. So like I mentioned earlier, like he was already like set apart, and there were certain things even before he was born that showed us that like God had purposely like brought him, for a very, for this time.
For a time such as this.
For a time such as this, and spoke to his mom, and was very specific to his mom about certain things she had to do as well, which we've talked about in a previous episode. And so like he grew up in this environment of, knowing like who God is. Now, if he didn't accept it that way, that's different. But, he was very much born into that culture. And so he knew better, but decided to not focus on that. And so because of that, I think, or at least partially, he didn't share that with Delilah. And Delilah, even if she had grown up in like a, half Israelite, you can see a lot of the influence from the Philistine side of her that probably won over. Okay, so unfortunately, because Delilah did not know God, nor did she know the importance of the gifts Samson received from God, which is his strength, she valued the money and loyalty to the Philistine rulers over him. So her priorities were not in the right place. she was very much looking out for herself. So this is definitely like a two-part story where both parties are to blame. So they both did things. So Samson was literally going rogue, doing whatever he wanted. And because of this soul tie, this connection that he had with Delilah, this person that he was in a relationship, he was doing, the exact same thing. Like she was also, kind of doing the same thing. So when we are in a relationship, as we mentioned before, our husband or wife or the person we're having sex with who isn't your husband or wife is a direct reflection of you. So having sex with that person, whether under the covering of covenant or not, does create a bond where you do become one regardless of paperwork or saying I do and that kind of thing. So this is why God is so clear in his word about the boundaries of sex. So we know they weren't married, but we know they had a bond because they were together. They were a couple. The Bible says they were in a relationship. So we know that. So specifically, we create a soul covenant, which is also known as a soul tie. You can also an eye covenant and a blood covenant, which all can be, connected with one person. Now, again, this is another episode, but when we know information, it is our duty to inform. We can do an episode about it if you'll want, but at least now you're aware that you can also do your own research. So these covenants, if not made with a spouse, must be confessed, repented, and renounced to be broken. And so this is something that very much Samson and Delilah were dealing with. And I think a lot of their problems and everything that came about it was because they were not under covenant and they were very much trying to act as single individuals and trying to compete with each other, but trying to be a couple at the same time.
Man, even you explaining it was like, what? It just sounds like a recipe for something to implode. But I think it like you said, when you were explaining their relationship, it was like two single people who are having sex. And so because they have sex, they are now one, but they are not under the protection of God because they are not in covenant, because they are not actually legally married. They haven't promised their lives to each other, but they're pretending to because they're having sex, but they still want to live as individuals. It's just So
yeah. So this two individuals pretending to be married, but they're not married. But
it's just a constant rift of just kind of searching for your own interest, right? Or fighting for your own interest at all times. So he wants to protect himself.
Right.
She wants money. She wants to turn him in. He's still there because he supposedly quote unquote loves her. And I looked up the word love in the concordance because I'm like, what is this kind of love? But it could be love, it could be lust, it could be several things. But we know that this isn't real love. You know what I mean? We can see it. Mm-hmm. And she might have just been beautiful and he was famous and they got together. It's an explosive celebrity couple.
Yeah, definitely. I remember reading that part where he's like, but he loved her and, he was in love with her. And it did make me think. I didn't go and look for it. But to me, I was like, yeah, but you think you love her because you wouldn't lie to the person you love and you would trust them with your secret if you loved her. So it made me question, you're saying love, but I don't think you know what that really means. And I think that's also reflective of him not having that relationship with God and understanding God's love in order to be able to love her. And so she didn't, she wasn't able to receive that because he didn't even understand that himself.
But I think when it comes to Delilah, again, similar to Lot's wife and Potiphar's wife, she is a product of her environment. And whatever that environment might be, right? We're not 100% sure whether she's Hebrew, Philistine, or both. But we can just see, just even with the intentions that Samson came to her, right? Even when we were researching, I found that she might have been a prostitute or something, although the Bible doesn't tell us either, because in a different chapter, he does sleep with a prostitute. And so maybe he just found another one.
Yeah, right before this, it talks about that. And so then it leads to him being in a relationship with Delilah. And you're like, is it from the same place? Is it the same type of lady? So yeah. It doesn't tell you, but
yeah. So there's a lot of speculation that he's drawn towards. Yes, because he had this it was lust of the flesh, right? And he was drawn to,
which is what makes me think when he says love, it's are you
right? He was drawn to these women, and it's interesting because of course we know that the lust of the flesh, it happens through the eyes because he's looking and lusting after all these Philistine women that he knows I'm sure Manoah and his mother told him he had no business being with any of these women. But
nope.
when
you are set apart.
when he gets captured and his eyes get torn out, like his eyes are what lead him to destruction, and that's what they tear out. You know what I mean? Oh goodness! But thank God for Jesus, because Jesus came and he was betrayed by Judas. However, it was part of the plan. And then he was not defeated by the lust of the flesh when the devil came to him and offered him all the stuff. And we have been redeemed. Yes.
If you've ever had any of these ties, like we mentioned, like there is redemption, there is, coming back to God. Like we just have to confess, repent, and renounce these things. But like God is here with open arms, and he is, he has covered you as long as you confess to him and repent.
Yeah. And these things, like she said, they can be broken. They can be broken. We have broken them. They can be broken. You just have to confess with your mouth. Like, this is not like I confess in my heart. No. I confess in my head. No. Come talk to the Lord and confess with your mouth, and he'll lead you to breaking those things. Yeah, he'll lead you to breaking those things. And sometimes there's extra things that you have to do. Like, for example, at some point I had to change my phone number. And that was part of my process to break all of these
blocking
ties.
Certain people.
Yeah, block certain people. Sometimes you have to fast. Sometimes you have to move. Sometimes you have to quit your job. Like, just after you confess and talk to the Lord about it. Hey, this is what happened. I'm sorry. I need your help to get out of this. I need your help to heal. He will lead you through all of these things, but you have to surrender all of it to him.
Exactly. Yeah. But there is an answer, and Jesus is the answer. Sounds kind of corny, but like honestly, like that's really where it comes down to. As I said it, I was like,
I'm so sorry to end with cheese, but
but I felt like a Sunday school slogan. But like Jesus is the answer. Y'all don't even know. If you don't know, now you know. But really, he's already paid the price. He's just waiting for us to come to him and accept that, and walk with him. And so, if Delilah was nowadays, like, let's show her that love of Jesus, and that she doesn't have to be with the Samson, and that she can break those ties, and that, the relationship that God has for her is not one of toxicity and lying and betrayal and all these things, but really primarily a relationship with God.
Yeah, because what you said just made me think that another example of just the Delilah and her situation is that everything she was doing was like a work of her hands. She was trying to do everything on her own, trying to survive on her own, trying to make money on her own, trying to get information out of him, and just all of it, so that's part of her story. And, we don't know the rest of Delilah's story. There's speculation of how she was potentially Goliath's mother or something, who we know was the massive Philistine warrior. We don't know if that's true either, but we hope that she repented and came to salvation. That's what we hope for. that she met the true and living God.
And that her proximity to Israel went beyond just being in between, but actually led her to know the real God.
We hope so. But this is Delilah. This is her story, and this is us revisiting her story and just fleshing it out more about just now we even know what her name means. I mean, we got context, people.
That's already
we
a
know
plus.
things. But we hope that you enjoyed this episode. Again, the recommended episodes before this one, if you wanted to jump back and listen to those. So we just did this one. The other episodes that we talked about were episode 13, which is the original Bad Girls Club. And then we have episode 29, which is just the story of Samson and Delilah as told by the Bible. And then this is just the B-side of that story. And we hope you enjoyed all three of them. Yeah, so we appreciate you as always. Thank you so much for following along with our journey and supporting the podcast. We would appreciate it if you follow us on social media, if you leave us a review, and if you let us know maybe the last 5 episodes, which one was the one that you liked the best and why. As always, we hope that you enjoyed this episode. This is Fran.
This is Yadi.
We are the Midtown Misfits, and we will see you next week. Bye.
Bye.